The Marinade.
There's no O in marinade. Let's try it one more time. Ready? 1, 2, 3.
The Marinade.
Marinade.
Bone marinade. The
That's
Marinade.
The Marinade. With Jason Earle.
Woke up with a gasp, and my lungs fill with water. Choking and grasping my throat, I rise to the surface. And as my vision clears, I witness such majestic trees are crumbling. Suddenly a creature fills my thoughts, and he whispers, stay close to the roots. Earth will keep you warm here. That's a cold sun.
Welcome to The Marinade with Jason Earle, a free-flowing conversation about the creative process with creative people. This is a bonus episode, and our guest is musician Tom Miekle, who records under the name Mappe. Our bonus series is where we put conversations that may not make sense as feature episodes, usually phone conversations that aren't necessarily in person, but are nonetheless worthy of being released into the world, and this is no exception. I am so excited to bring this conversation to you. Tom's record, Isle of Ailynn, was released in November of 2019. It's a concept record set in a fictional world that has framed dozens of evenings at home and afternoon runs and morning writing sessions for me lately. The song you're hearing in this episode is Estuary. That's the first track off of Isle of Ailynn. You can find all things Mappe at mappeof.com, and I recommend going there and doing a little bit of research about the record. In addition to listening to this conversation, Mappe, that's MAPPEOF.com. You can also keep up with all things Marinade at marinadepodcast.com and on Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook. We have a lot of cool things coming up. Our next feature episode 48 of The Marinade with Jason Earle, is with Caleb Caudle, the great Caleb Caudle, who stopped by Marinade Studios back in November when he was in town playing the Folk Yeah Festival. We had a delightful conversation, and I'm excited to release that one. We also have another bonus episode coming up with Jay Cobb Anderson, who we caught up with by phone. Jay is one of the principal songwriters in the band Fruition, and we've long wanted to sit down with Jay. So many cool things happening. Plus, we've booked a couple of other amazing guests. Head on over to marinadepodcast.com to stay in touch, and also follow us. Make sure you follow us on social media, because we do, especially on Twitter, update what's going on with the show, but I try to make sure that we update all three of those: Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. And you can find us there. You can also interact with us. We love getting messages. We love responding to tweets or responding to comments on Instagram. So please don't hesitate to commune with us over there. And if you really like what we're doing and you want to go deeper, consider joining our Patreon community. Just a few bucks a month, you can get exclusive content, like our Patreon only show, Jason's Journey, where I talk about the moments that have shaped my creative life. It makes a big difference for us. Even just a little bit every month helps us continue to put out this kind of content for you, and hopefully will lead to even greater things in 2020. And so far, we're off to a fantastic start. All right, y'all, without further ado, it is my distinct honor to present my conversation with Tom Miekle.
Hello?
Hi, this is Jason Earle from the Marinade Podcast calling for Tom Miekle.
Speaking. How you doing?
I'm doing quite well, man. How are you? Thank you so much for talking to us.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Thanks for calling.
Yeah, I'm excited, man. This record, the Isle of Ailynn, is gorgeous, and
Thank you very much.
It's so fascinating to me, man. It's
That's great. That'll make this conversation fun.
Yeah, I think it will be fun. So I want, for folks who are listening to this, I want them to, go and read your essay that you put on mappeof.com.
Oh, cool. Appreciate that.
Yeah, first of all, it's really well written, not surprisingly after hearing your record. But
Thank you.
I just there's so much I want to dive into, man. And I love, I love how you start off talking in that essay about the fact that you just finished a cross Canada tour and that this melody had been sticking with you. Can you kind of walk us through that, like what was happening in your mind in that time? You've got this melody, it's sticking with you, and then the lyrics are coming from pieces in your notebook, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, at that time, I had basically said goodbye to the first record in terms of like writing the music, probably 2 or 3 years prior, maybe 2.5.
Mm-hmm.
So we were out on the road playing that music as a band, and like, slightly different arrangements and stuff. But it's interesting. I think that the melody that I'm referring to is in Isle of Ailynn. It's sort of like, it's right off the bat, that sort of main kind of like winding melody thing that doesn't seem to have like any particular home.
Mm-hmm.
And there was something just about that, the tonality of that and the ambiguity that was really interesting to me, and felt like something like a part of my musical identity, I guess, that I hadn't accessed before in that way. So I think that I remember actually we were playing a show in Winnipeg. We had like a bunch of time. For some reason, we had 3 days off in Winnipeg just because of the way the tour was routed. And there was this piano in the dressing room. Mm-hmm. And I was kind of playing around with that melody. And I remember talking to Corey, one of my bandmates, and being like, I know that this is something, but I don't know what it is yet. It was one of those moments where it was just this sort of ambiguous piece. And then, I got home from that tour, and the gears just started turning, I guess. And obviously on tour, there's a lot of driving and downtime and stuff. So I had been listening to a bunch of podcasts about mythology and ancient history and stuff like that. And I think that obviously influenced to a great degree where that stuff went, but the melody kind of spoke to that vibe anyway, so it was kind of a serendipitous thing.
That's beautiful. So the part about the notebook, when you're on tour, or I guess it could be at any time, are you just writing down pieces of ideas? Are you journaling every day? What does that part of the process look like?
I definitely try to keep that stuff up as much as possible. It's like an ongoing, I kind of go in and out of it depending on where I'm at in the process, Mm-hmm. On the road, sometimes you just end up sleeping the whole time because, for various reasons, you have to get up early and drive and all that, or you're on a driving shift, all that logistical stuff. But I definitely try to, keep up on reading and taking notes on things. But I think in the time around it too, a lot of the time I was spending when I was at home I was trying to find places to put my my energy elsewhere than music, just trying to explore things that were, I guess because I'd been, I went to school for music and I'd been so totally immersed in that. And also from an educational standpoint, that was like all I was thinking about.
Yeah.
So I think when it came to that time, I just wanted to explore other things. I don't know, academically, for lack of a better word, but just like exploring concepts I hadn't been able to because I've been so immersed in the music. So when it came, writing stuff in my notebook and all of that is really just derived from me trying to pursue other, other aspects of life and other topics, and then that stuff kind of just gradually fed itself in relatively naturally into the music, which was kind of a change of pace, I guess, from the first record.
Isn't it wonderful how when you step outside of whatever your creative comfort zone is, how it does tend to spark the sort of the primary avenue that you use, right? So like if you're a songwriter and you, I don't know, you write a novel or you work on poetry or whatever, how that tends to like really inform whatever your main creative gig is.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a difficult thing to do sometimes because, I don't know, something I definitely struggle with on a regular basis is just, how much effort is enough and how much is, like, when can you really, especially in an industry like this, when you're just putting your all in at all times, you have to kind of give yourself permission to do other things, which I think is really important because, like, where else, music can't only feed itself, right? It has to be fed from other avenues. And so it's just important to kind of step back and dive into other things. And I feel like I try to just maintain a certain level of curiosity about the world and all those things and try to find ways to work it into the craft, I guess. That's
great. Is there anything you do to make sure that you're, that you are diversifying in that way, or is it just a part of your regular routine?
It kind of depends. Depends where I'm at. Again, in the process or in life generally. Like, at that time I was just spending any spare time I had reading up on mythology and Carl Jung and like the psychology of it and all of that. That was like just something I was particularly interested in and didn't really have another place to kind of like channel that energy, or that interest. And I don't know if it's necessarily a conscious thing. Like I said, I try to keep up on journaling and writing, and I do enjoy the, writing and words and all of that part of the process. And so I try to keep that maintained as a separate entity as well, aside from writing lyrics, writing short fiction or whatever it is, like not necessarily anything I would release, but just something to kind of keep those gears turning. Like, there's this book that I read a while ago now, but it's kind of some of the habits have stuck with me, called Writing Better Lyrics, which I think is I feel like I've seen it on a few people's bookshelves here and there. I think Pat Pattison is the author's name, but it's just like kind of a great, it's a great guide to kind of keep that, keep your mind fresh, and just like free writing, all that kind of stuff. Something I tried to do now and then just to, refresh.
That's great, man. The fact that you are taking this project on from a different perspective, right? That you're approaching the process differently from your first record. I want to kind of get into how you reconciled that. So in your essay, you talk about the fact that this is a quote from it, to have a list of songs in front of you that you've yet to write can be daunting.
Yeah. That part of it, I mean, it is daunting, but also exciting. And that's, I think, the sort of mission statement of the project for me, especially now after having done this record. It's like, I guess before I made this record, I didn't really know there was still so many potential avenues to take this project, and because I feel like the first record for me was meant to be this kind of blank slate, for lack of a better term, a way to channel things that I was going through at that time, but also knowing that, you know, there was a lot of aspects of my, again, musical identity or however you want to put it, that I wanted to put into it. So I think sitting down to write another record and knowing that, you know, considering where I was at in my life and, you know, that I didn't necessarily have this spark of a moment or something that happened in my life or any of those things that normally trigger the writing process, you know, or for a lot of people, that's where it comes from, right? There's some sort of hardship or something that happens in the world that they're really passionate about and all of those things. And not that those things haven't happened, but not necessarily in a way that for me felt appropriate to write about.
Yeah.
So when it started to kind of snowball into this, I mean, like I always was really into, you know, prog records and stuff like that. And the conceptual side of things in music. Like I always loved records I played front to back. And, you know, that's another thing I kind of touched on in the essay, that I wanted to make a record like that. And, you know, and that was the goal with the first record too, but because it was just songs that were compiled, you know, rather than written with that intention. So I think taking it to the nth degree and like, you know, having this collection of words that I knew had this common connection, whatever it was, this same kind of like mythic quality that I wanted in the music, and that melody that I was talking about earlier kind of invoked. It was almost freeing in a way to put these words in front of me and say to myself, this is the sort of identity of those words, you know, and then let's write music to that. It was almost easier to write music to something that felt sort of predefined rather than just sitting down with a blank piece of paper or a blank session or whatever and trying to throw sounds out there and into the ether and make it have an identity, you know?
Yeah. Well, I think
the identity was already there.
Well, that's really interesting because it seems like there's almost like these competing forces. And on the one hand, it's very freeing for you in all the ways you just described. On the other hand, in the essay, you talk a little bit about the fact that you say, I knew I'd have a hell of a time to explaining this to anyone. And I think, because I do think the finished product, it for me, took a couple of listens for it to seep in, right? So because it's not, you know, it's not a series of like traditional folk songs, or it's not, you know, it's not straightforward, right? Like it's you're existing in this world, in this fictional world, and there's a mood to it. And I also, and for folks listening, I recommend this. I also listened to it first on a stereo, and not a great stereo. And then I put my nice headphones on and lived in that world. And just the nuance comes through so much more clearly. So to folks listening, I highly recommend it in that way, because of how nuanced the music is and because there is a mood that you're setting, right? And so I think it's interesting. There's like this, on the one hand, it seems freeing, but on the other hand, it seems like you're kind of like, it kind of took a little bit of courage to go down that path.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you saying that, because in a lot of ways that is true. Yeah, I mean, like, thankfully the music came rather quickly, at least initially, like the initial structure of it, of the record, and so I just kind of, once that all came out, and I had like these, you know, 10-minute songs, like a couple 10-minute songs. At that time, that's how long they were. Yeah. And I was just like, okay, this is where I'm going, I guess. Like, you know what I mean? It's almost like it is in some ways out of my control in I don't know, I fear sounding pretentious in saying that, but like it is just like, I'm just throwing stuff out there, you know, and then it was like, oh yeah, this is where I need to go. This makes sense.
Yeah.
But I know that I know that like when I bring this to the people that I'm going to bring it to, that there's going to be like, oh man, where is this headed? Like, is this just like, you know, your standard issue, like artistic madness or whatever?
Well, how was it received? Like at first?
I mean, I think my peers, you know, amongst my peers, everybody knew that side of me, you know? So like, my peers weren't that surprised. I would say it maybe took a little bit of like, you know, this is what it, you know, showing demos to anybody is a little bit, you're always like adding qualifiers, you know, like, oh, this isn't quite the way it's going to be and all that. There's all that like sort of reservation and stuff.
Why do we do that? We do that with all creative pursuits, I feel like. Yeah,
totally. Yeah. It's always like, oh, it's not done. Like, oh, this is, you know, but because you always want to present, you know, you always want to put your best foot forward and present the big picture, right?
And I guess you don't want to be like, this is the best shit ever. You know?
But you know, because then you're putting, I think we all just fear rejection, right? So then you're putting yourself totally on the line, like, this is the best I can do. And if you don't like this, then like, you don't like what I do, you know? But I think to a certain extent, you just have to accept that, like that is going to be the case. And I think this record for me was that moment where I was like, okay, I mean, at least for this project at this point in my life, this is my identity. And I'm like, I personally, it was I guess the first time where I personally felt so much, I just identified with the music so much, across like my whole sort of trajectory as a musician, that it didn't ultimately matter how it was received, you know? Like, obviously I want people to listen to it and be immersed in it and follow along with the journey and all of those things. But I guess purely speaking from like the standpoint that we're referencing, which is, you know, showing people stuff and trying to be proud of it, but also like defend yourself, you know? I guess I was just trying to be proud of it as much as I could and stay focused on that, you know, on that side of it.
You mentioned feeling concerned about sounding pretentious, and then
ironic, right?
Well, there's something I kind of want to explore if you'll go down this with me, just kind of personally.
Yeah, totally.
It's like there's like what did you say in the essay? You talked in the essay about coming from, and the reason I'm bringing this up is because it's something I deal with, coming from a good family and you say a wonderful family, a comfortable home, a beautiful country. I was just in your country this summer. It is beautiful. And
thank you.
Yeah, it's great. That almost like, this is my word, not yours, but that imposter syndrome of like,
sure,
why do I have anything to say? My life's pretty damn good. Like, I own my home and I have health insurance in America. And, you know, not everybody has these things. So, how much do you wrestle with those kinds of issues and questions? Just because it has come up now a couple times. And what do you do to work on that?
I mean, it's something I've always thought about, and I think it's important to recognize to some degree, I guess, to be at least self-aware, you know, in the process. I mean, not to say that people shouldn't say, you know, be honest in the way that they feel in their music, but at the same time, I guess, you know, given the direction that I went on this record, which was to sort of build this fictional world and have these events take place in this fictional world, I think in some ways was driven by that sense of not necessarily having a whole lot to contribute to the conversation, if we're speaking from like a broader standpoint. I didn't, there's certainly like, let's say, vaguely political undertones to the record, or sort of maybe broader statements about the world and about humanity and all of those things that I just think about in my own mind, and I don't necessarily have another way to express those things. But I didn't want to do it in sort of an opaque way where I was speaking literally about anything. It was more just about the broad ideas, because I feel like there is, first of all, so many artists out there now that are speaking on issues that maybe I'm passionate about, but they're at least, more connected to or have some sort of cultural connection to. Whereas for me, given, my position in society, as I mentioned, it made more sense for me to offer up this, this fantasy world that would enable people to not necessarily like in the sort of escapism element of it. I've struggled with to some degree, because I don't think that's necessarily the right answer, but I think just giving a space where it doesn't necessarily matter. Like, it doesn't matter where you're coming from. It's all open-ended, and that part of it was exciting to me.
Yeah. To quote Tom Miekle, it's a way to ask hefty questions without hefty consequence.
There you go.
I like that a lot, man. I like that a lot.
Thanks.
And I think that's something that I've been trying to do myself is, and through any art, ultimately this podcast, there are not hefty consequences from what we discuss, but I do think it makes a difference. I do think that we can spark someone to think differently about something. And even if we are preaching to the choir half the time,
sure.
It's still a way to challenge each other's thinking and to come at it from a different perspective. And I don't think that just because, my life is pretty good and I'm pretty fortunate, or your life is pretty good and you're pretty fortunate, that in some way it discounts or diminishes what we have to say. It's just different.
Yeah.
And I feel the same
right.
thing. Like, I totally get what you're saying, but I don't think we have some, like, our opinion is less valuable or our thoughts are less valuable, as long as it's thoughtful and it's coming from a place of empathy and it's coming from a place of meaning, which it is.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think you hit the nail on the head. It's just about being thoughtful and empathetic and, considerate of other situations and trying to, provide something positive ultimately. Right. That's, I think, in the state of things, and not to be, I feel like it's so everybody is using the way things are now, whatever. Yeah. But considering the socio-political climate, I think the best thing at least for me to do personally is just to provide something positive, something for people to dive into and kind of live in. And I don't know, I remember those records that I was listening to when I was a kid, and maybe I didn't have the same, I didn't have the weight of the world on my shoulders at that time. Yeah. But it just offered some place of solace, like no matter where you're coming from, that's the hope.
Right. Because, we're all going through it. We may have different challenges, but it's not like life is just a piece of cake for any of us, even if we have the advantages, Yeah,
absolutely.
I think, I was talking to a friend on New Year's Eve, and she asked me how 2019 treated me. And that's how she said it. And the way, from a lot of people, that question would be a throwaway question, and they would expect a throwaway answer, almost rhetorical. Yeah. But this was a very earnest person who I knew genuinely wanted to know. How did I do? And my anxiety immediately went to the places I messed up, the bad things that happened. Like, that's the first thing my brain did. And then I started thinking about my podcast, and I started talking about it. And that led me to think about this whole list of amazing things that happened in my life in 2019.
Yeah.
And I just thought that was so interesting that my brain first thing went to all of the negative stuff. My anxiety immediately went there. And then once I started unpacking it, 2019 was pretty dope. It just doesn't feel like that, you know?
Yeah. I think it's, I think you're not alone in that regard. That's for sure. Yeah. And I feel that as well. I mean, like, yeah, I mean, I got to put this record out, which I think, you know, it was the culminating result of like 2 years of work and even longer prior, sort of like putting these ideas together, you know, and then it's so easy to, you know, to let that slip away and you know, think about the day-to-day challenges and all of those things. But yeah, it's just so important to reflect and be grateful, you know. But you're right. It's just like that knee-jerk thing, and I think, yeah, no matter where you are, people experience that.
Right.
Yeah.
Bringing it back to the record a little bit, we had a nice little tangent there, but back to the record.
Yeah.
The artwork, each song has its own piece of art, which is so cool. And Quinn Henderson, right, is the artist?
Yeah, you bet.
What did that look like? Did you have an idea for what you wanted each picture to represent, or did Quinn come up with these ideas? What did that collaboration look like?
So great, man.
Cool.
Yeah, it was the best. So, so like I said, I mean, I had these environments, you know, that list of words ended up being these particular sort of regions, like geographical regions in this fictional world that I was creating. And so from the time that I had those words, I had this general sense of what those places looked like. And then that's kind of the basis for on which I built the music. So I knew what had to be evoked from each of those places. You know, it was like relatively, I you know, from the beginning, I started sort of writing out location details and stuff. Like there's this whole collection of like encyclopedic information about the fictional world, like to draw from for whatever purpose. And I sent that to Quinn kind of on our initial meeting. We sat down at a Starbucks and started talking about the aesthetic approach that I was going for. And I quoted some Japanese woodblock art was like one of the main influences for it, but also the golden age of illustration, and particularly this Danish illustrator called K. Nielsen did a bunch of stuff. I guess it's like turn of the century, maybe late 1800s, but it's just so beautiful and mystical and all the things that I wanted out of this record. And so those two kind of pillars, I threw at Quinn. He was just like, "Oh man, this is exactly the wave I'm riding right now." And it was just so easy, you know. It was so like just a perfect fit. And so he sent me the first draft of I think Kintail was the first piece that he sent me, and I was just like, "Yep." Right, like I looked at it and I just like shook my honestly, like I almost teared up because it was just like, awesome. This is it's the kind of artistic relationship that you look for, you know what I mean? You just want to have that like unspoken understanding, and not that we didn't talk about it, but it took very little notes and back and forth and all that stuff. Like most of the time it was like, yeah, man, you got it. You just keep doing what you're doing.
It's so beautiful how that, like, that is so rare too. I saw there's two songwriters here in town that I absolutely love, Stephen Rock and Patrick Hagerman. And Stephen is one of those guys that like doesn't have any records, and it drives everyone who hears him crazy, you know, because he's just so good. It's like, why? The world needs to hear this, and
totally,
you know, just put this out, please. But he was telling me last night that he doesn't really play with other people very often. He's a folk singer, and he just like doesn't feel comfortable or for whatever reason. But there's something about Patrick where they just do it, and they did a version of Atlantic City last night that was just dynamite, just floored the room, and it was just cool. And he's like, I just feel like this guy's my brother.
Song?
Yeah.
Oh, great.
Yeah, it was awesome. Yeah, Steven was singing and Patrick was just playing with him, and doing some harmonies, and it just was seamless, And they don't jam together ever, They just every once in a while will get together, and it's just seamless, It's just like this connection that you have with another creative, and it doesn't happen with everybody. It just those magic moments.
It's a really special thing, and it's like it kind of brings you back to the whole. I mean, especially connecting with an artist that's like outside of your field, like I've never really had that kind of relationship with a visual artist.
Right.
And that, just intrinsically understood what I was in pursuit of, it's just like, definitely don't take that for granted. It kind of makes you step back and think about like the big picture of art and why, what the whole point of it is, you know what I mean? Which is like when you're so deep in the process and the, especially like, building a fictional world, all that stuff that's like very creative, but it's also craft and like you're deep into it, and it's super exciting, but sometimes you get like kind of lost trying to find your way through this creative process. And then when you hit moments like that, just kind of gives you an opportunity to think about the fact that like we're all just doing this to make those connections, and to like, even if it's not an initial, like in the way that I had with Quinn, where it was just so smooth and also like a close working relationship, but even just putting this music out there and hoping that that same kind of feeling, that like whatever that ambiguous thing is, that, the reason you do this podcast and the reason that any of us make anything is to have that kind of connection, in any way that we can. So,
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love that. And that to get there, it requires you to do what we talked about earlier, the difficult thing, which is to show it to somebody else, be
like, this is me.
Yeah.
This is, or this is the project, this is like the identity, and take it or leave it,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think, I don't know about you, but I think I'm getting better at that. The more I do, the more comfortable I feel putting it out there.
I think eventually you just find yourself not having a choice, and you put yourself in that, once you sign up for it, it's like you're on that train, and you don't, that's what you like. I have a relationship with a record label, and like I'm going to make records and put them out, and it's like, it's interesting to think back before I had ever released any music, like as a solo artist or anything like that, and how daunting the prospect of putting music on the internet was.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it is like, and I know that there's, like people that I'm close with who have like struggled with that. It's just that initial push, that initial, like, I have to put myself out there and know that people are going to not like it. Because that's going to happen, like there's going to be someone who listens to it and it's not for them. And it's like, you just have to find a way to come to terms with that and focus on the people, like, like thankfully you, like the record found, and, there's something in it for you. And you have to have faith that if there's something in it for you personally, if there's a reason that you made it, then there's a reason that someone out there is going to listen to it and enjoy it, So.
I love that. That's so true. And it's so easy to lose sight of. Let's not lose sight of that.
Hang on to it for me.
Seriously, man. Well, it's immortalized now. It's
yeah, exactly.
Next Sunday it'll be on the internet for as long as the internet exists, until this Iranian cyber attack. I'm sure they're coming after me first.
Yeah. Now they are, yeah.
Yeah, right. Oh man, thank you so much. We always end with just what art are you consuming that you like? Music, books, film, whatever it is that's got you fired up at the moment. What's got you excited right now?
Oh man. Well, I just there's two things. So
Nice.
for Christmas, my girlfriend got me the second book in the Wheel of Time series,
Okay.
which is like a fantasy novel series by Robert Jordan.
Okay.
So I'm excited about that, and I've also been playing. We just got like controllers hooked up to my PC, so we're playing Hollow Knight and Celeste, which are two like PC games that have like gorgeous soundtracks, and they're just like beautiful indie games. I'm really starting to like appreciate the artistry of indie video games.
Cool.
So that's kind of the train that I'm riding right now, and kind of exploring that world a little bit. So yeah,
You think
that's where I'm at.
That's awesome. Do you think you'd ever be interested in soundtracking a game?
Yeah, so that's what I'm kind of digging into right now, is learning the process, like of adaptive music and 3D audio and all that stuff. That's kind of like these past couple weeks I've had a little bit of a break, so I've just been spending most of that time learning how to do that stuff
That's great, man.
and digging into that world. Yeah, I mean, another part of what I try to do is film score work, and I'd really like to get into the video game soundtrack world.
Awesome.
So yeah. Thanks for asking.
Yeah, no, that's exciting, man. So mappeof.com for everything about you and your music. You got a few shows coming up in March, looks like, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, with Tamino, opening for Tamino.
Cool.
On a handful of dates.
You coming to the
and
States?
Matt Holobowski.
Have you played much in the States?
A handful of shows. We did. We were just down there doing a little showcase in New York.
Cool.
But we haven't been down sort of full on in over a year or so. So I'm really hoping that this year and this record brings some more U.S. visits for sure.
Yeah, I hope it brings you down our way, man. It's
yeah, I'd love to chat in person.
Yeah, that would be amazing. Well, Tom, this has been such a pleasure. I love the record. I'm so grateful for your time, and I'm so grateful for your art.
Thank you very much, Jason. I appreciate it. It was a great chat.
Thanks, man. Take care.
You too.
All right. Bye.